Idealism can be very helpful in that it can inspire us to want to make the world a better place. But at the same time, and I would say really to a great extent, for most of the time, idealism is very dangerous. We see idealism on both sides of the political spectrum. We see a lot of right wing idealism, and we also see a lot of left wing idealism. And because most people are not well grounded and they live in the bliss of ignorance, um, when most people have idealism, it's almost always very warped and flawed. And I'm not saying this in a condescending way, I'm just saying this from my own experience and from what I have been reading. If you don't believe me, just look at any political election. You have one half of the country following some guy because they think he's the savior, and you have the other half of the country following some other guy because they think that he is the counter to the other guy and he's going to save them from the evils of the other guy. And so everyone thinks that their guy is just great and wonderful and not corrupt. But you have idealism on both sides. Left-wing idealism looks like the idea that we can create a collective consciousness of workers so that we can have collective ownership of production, and we can have collective ownership of the corporation so we can control the means of production. It's like, well, that's not going to happen because no matter how you look at it, in every single situation, there's always people who are going to be above you, and there's going to be people working underneath those people. You're going to have the superiors, and you're going to have those underneath the superiors. You're going to have the haves, and you're going to have the have-nots. You're going to have the rich, you're going to have the poor, you're going to have the elite, and you're going to have everyone else. And that's just the reality. And we can, pursue some sort of idealism to destroy that, but we always end up destroying each other. Or we can be content and we can learn how to treat each other well regardless of our socioeconomic position and live in peace. Then you have the right-wing idealism, which is, well, we can create this society where we can completely purge the world of all degenerates and destroy the elites. And in this sense, it's kind of similar to left-wing idealism, this idea of destroying the elite. But it's like, no, there's always going to be an elite who's going to rule over you. Or, we can create a society of ethno-states where people could just live collectively with their own people and with people who look like them. Yeah, tell that to the Yugoslavs. And so we can live in harmony and peace. And it's like, well, even if you live in a place where everyone looks like you're still going to find reasons to kill each other. Look at all the European wars. Look at the war between the Lebanese and the Palestinians. They look alike. They speak the same language. And yet they didn't like each other, had nothing to do with race. Look at the Yugoslav wars, Croats killing Serbs, Serbs having to fight everyone else, Bosnians and Albanians. These people looked alike, but they still hated each other. The worst enemies are your neighbors. The worst enemies are those who live amongst you. Your worst enemies are going to be those who are the most similar to you. Just like the worst forms of sectarian violence are between two sects that, theologically speaking, are very close. The Shiite versus Sunni. You have Catholic versus Orthodox. And yes, there were times where the Catholics and the Orthodox killed each other. Protestants versus Catholics, although Protestantism today is very different from what it was back in the 16th century. Lutheranism and Catholicism at one point in time were pretty close, very similar theologically speaking. And they killed each other for a very, very long time. They're really, this idealism is insane. This right-wing idealism, or we can create a society of not patriarchy, but we can create a society of hierarchy, and we can establish an aristocratic society, a meritocracy where everyone's position is based on their talents and their merits, and we can just destroy this terrible elite system, destroy all the elites that we have today and establish this meritocracy and this aristocracy. And yes, they are right-wingers who say these things, and it's like, well, yeah, but if you do that, then you end up with a new set of disasters. Enslavement, abuse of workers, you could have concentration camps, mass murder of people. that you don't like, minorities, certain people of a certain class, all sorts of disasters. Every revolution brings about its own set of new disasters. So you have a revolution against one disaster, or you have a revolution against what enough people perceive as a disaster, and then you do the revolution, and then you end up with a new set of disasters. So, the King of France is evil, King Louis XV is evil, which he really wasn't that bad. But he's so evil, and they got enough people to perceive that he was this evil person, and they did a revolution, and they ended up, from having one monarch, they had thousands of monarchs ruling over them. There's a scene in the film The Patriot. If you haven't seen the movie The Patriot, you should go see it. It stars Mel Gibson, and it's a very good movie. It's from the 1990s, but it was an excellent film with excellent acting, and it's a film on the American Revolutionary War. Now, I can't play any scenes of this film because YouTube has become more strict on this, but I'll just describe to you the scene. There's a scene in the film where the Americans are debating whether or not they should go to war against the British Empire. They should have a revolution against the British Empire. Mel Gibson's character is very hesitant because he is a father. He has a lot of kids. He's got a lot of land. He has, his wife died, so he is a widow, and he's got all these responsibilities, and the last thing he wants is war in his front yard. And there are people calling him a coward, and his own son calls him a coward because his son is very idealistic. And his son, played by Heath Ledger, he says, well, I won't hide behind my children, because he says, I want to join the war, and I want to fight the British and the Redcoats. And Mel Gibson says, when you have children of your own, you will understand. And his son looks at him and says, when I have children of my own, I won't hide behind them. I won't hide behind my children. So during this meeting, Mel Gibson tells these Americans who want a revolution, he says, why should I go to war to fight a tyrant 1,000 miles away just so I can be under 1,000 tyrants 10 miles away? Now, this was an actual quote. The people who wrote the script, they didn't just make that up. That was an actual statement that came from a real-life person who was hesitant to support the Revolutionary War. I don't remember his name, but that's an actual real quote. Although I'm probably saying it a little differently. I'm not saying it verbatim, but more or less that's what was said. But it stands true. It stands true, and it can be applied pretty much to any revolution. Well, why should I fight this one guy just so I can be under a new guy, a new ruler? This is why idealism is so, for the most part, it's very inadequate. There are some idealisms that are good. For example, let's make the society better, right? Let's get rid of barbarism. Let's try to get rid of barbarism. Let's try to make society better. But at the same time, no matter what we try to pursue, we always have to be content with what is good enough. What is good enough? In other words, you're always going to have corrupt politicians. You're always going to have politicians who are greedy. You're always going to have corruption in any government. But is it good enough? Is your life good enough? Can you be content with your life? Do you have food on the table? Are you making enough money to survive? Are you surviving, right? Are you having happiness? If you are living in an environment where you can pursue those things, then that is good enough. Are you well fed? Well, most Americans are technically overweight, right? Supposedly, we're all overweight. We're all, eating like pigs. Well, I would say that's good enough, right? I would say, I think that's good enough. Now, if people are being put into camps, and they're being, cops are busting into people's doors and arresting innocent people because they don't believe in, the principles of the Democrat Party, then I would say, yes, that is not good enough. That's evil, and that should be fought against, absolutely. So we have to be very careful, like, well, this politician did this one thing, but is it really affecting you? No. okay, it's good enough then. Your life is good enough. I think there's actually a term for this in Swedish culture. It's good enough. I forgot what it was, but there's a concept in Swedish culture that literally translates to good enough, and I think that's good enough, right? So idealism is very destructive. So those are my thoughts on that. I love talking about this subject, and I will talk more about it in future videos. So you guys just heard some Theo Langi. God bless.